Hey, what's up guys? Tyler here with Secure Team. So, quick video here, and before we start off, let me just ask you a really quick question. You guys raise your hands. How many of you have heard of the hollow moon theory? Not the hollow earth, but the hollow moon, as in the moon being hollow inside. Well, if you haven't heard of this theory, I've posted videos and I've spoken about this in the past, but believe it or not, and as crazy as that might sound, and I know it may sound crazy because a lot of us have been indoctrinated from birth, whether it be through science books in schools or the scientific data that we've been given online and on television, and it kind of goes back to this mantra that, well, if I see it on TV or I read it in a book, it must be true. But when it comes to the moon, appearances can be deceiving. Robin Brett, a scientist for NASA, once stated, quote, "It seems easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence." And honestly, I couldn't have said it better myself. And when you make a statement like that, it's got to be rooted in a lot of deep-seated information, something that you know. You don't just make an off-the-cuff comment like that, unless you know certain things. So our moon is extremely fascinating. It's fascinated scientists for years. And many people believe that the moon is actually a possibly terraformed or an engineered piece of hardware, or basically an artificial structure that's hollow on the inside. When the astronauts flew to the moon back during the Apollo missions, at one point they slammed a satellite into the moon's surface. And according to one of the astronauts, that when this satellite hit, that the moon, quote, rang like a bell for hours after. It was almost as if this satellite hit a solid, hollow, metallic sphere, where it created reverberations that lasted for hours after it hit and could be felt hundreds of miles away on other parts of the moon. So that was kind of what made people take a step back and go, wow, something's not right here. And let me just pause and we'll get back to this analysis of our moon being hollow. I'm going to present you with some quotes by some of the most well-respected men in science and astrophysics, and what they have said about our moon and just how strange it is. But as to what I said at the beginning of the video, how we may have an independent look at the moon for the first time, comes after a new report released online states that there is a company that wants to mine the moon that has gotten enough money for an actual maiden lunar flight. So this comes courtesy of Tech Times, and a Florida-based company called Moon Express, which hopes to mine the moon someday, has received the full funding it needs to make its first trip to the moon. Moon Express is one of the teams that has been competing for $30 million courtesy of the Google Lunar X Prize, or GLXP. The X Prize offers $20 million to the first privately funded team that would land a spacecraft on the moon, then move the vehicle at least 1,600 feet, and then send back high-resolution images. So they would have to do all of those things: fund it, land on the moon, move 1,600 feet, and send back high-resolution pics. And Moon Express, this company, is one of the front-runners to receive this prize, and has already managed to secure permission from the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, to land on the surface of the moon, becoming the first private company in the world to get permission to travel beyond our planet's orbit after months of negotiations with government officials. And on a side note here, I can only imagine what these negotiations were, what exactly the government has or is attempting to force this private company to do, and I'm sure it has something to do with the images that they send back, where they can land, because I'm sure the government doesn't want a private company rooting around the moon, which we know to be chock full of structures and anomalous activity. But up until now, all commercial companies have been limited to operations in Earth's orbit only, and it has been only governments that have sent missions to other worlds, including the moon. So Moon Express has basically got permission and the funding, and are about to receive another $30 million to land on the moon and mine it. They're going to dig down and mine it, which, if they are public with us and transparent, will give us a first-hand view of what is underneath the soil. They're going to be mining helium-3, by the way. So this is big news, very big news. Private company, first in the history, first one that the government has allowed to leave Earth orbit. The government, in all of its secrecy, they still don't want the public to think that they're trying to keep people from going to the moon, because that would only create more suspicion. So them allowing this private company to go to the moon may just be the government attempting to show us that they have nothing to hide by continuing this monopoly on space. So it's big, big news, and it goes back to this theory. And I've had a couple people talk to me about this on Twitter, about, this is big, especially for the hollow moon theory, because we're going to be going there and we're going to be digging down. Again, there have been many theories about the moon. Some have said that the moon was towed into orbit around Earth, that it wasn't here before, that it was brought here by some sort of spacecraft, by something, thousands or millions of years ago. People have also said that because of the strange anomalous features and data that we know about the moon, that there's a very good likelihood it's an artificial satellite, a massive spacecraft, if you will, that's actually hollow on the inside, and what we're seeing on the outside is nothing more than a facade, something that looks like a moon, but on the inside has a metallic, hollow hull, kind of like one you would think would ring like a bell if something smashed into it. So now you're probably thinking, all right, Tyler is talking about the moon being hollow, and I need some sort of outside proof, all right? I need to hear from scientists, some real highly respected people, before I'm just going to take his word for it, especially if you're new to the channel. And I do understand that if you are new to the channel and this topic, a lot of these things will go right over your head. They will seem so outrageous that you may just unsubscribe, but please don't, because as I've said many times before, the truth and reality is much stranger than fiction, and we have all been indoctrinated since birth to believe a certain set of ideas and so-called truths that, upon just a little bit of research, start to fall apart at the seams. So let's go down a list of some of the most famous quotes that have been said throughout history pertaining to just how anomalous our moon's existence is. We'll first start from a quote by a man named Isaac Asimov, who is an American author and a professor of biochemistry at Boston University. He said, quote, "We cannot help but come to the conclusion that the moon by rights ought not be there. The fact that it is there is one of the strokes of luck almost too good to accept. Small planets such as Earth, with weak gravitational fields, might well lack satellites. In general, then, when a planet does have satellites, those satellites are much smaller than the planet itself. Therefore, even if the Earth has a satellite, there would be every reason to suspect that at best it would be a tiny world, perhaps 30 miles in diameter. But that is not so. Earth not only has a satellite, but it's a giant satellite, 2,160 miles in diameter. How is it then that tiny Earth has one? The moon is basically a freak of nature." According to Ken Johnson, the supervisor of the Data and Photo Control Department, during the 1969 Apollo moon mission, and after the lunar module crashed into the surface with a force that was equivalent to about a ton of TNT, it was said that the moon not only rang like a bell, but that it also, quote, wobbled in such a precise way that it was almost as though it had gigantic hydraulic damper struts inside of it. Dr. D.L. Anderson, professor of geophysics and the director of the seismological laboratories at the California Institute of Technology, is quoted as saying, "The moon is made inside out, and that its inner and outer compositions should be the other way around." Lon Hood from the University of Arizona said, quote, "We knew that the moon's core was small, but we didn't know it was this small. This really does add weight to the idea that the moon's origin is unique and unlike any other terrestrial body." Dr. Sean C. Sullivan from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology said, quote, The lunar orbiter experiments had vastly improved knowledge of the moon's gravitational field and indicated the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow. Dr. Gordon MacDonald of NASA once said, quote, "It would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere." When looking at the moon, Dr. MacDonald surmised that the data must have been wrong, only to find that it wasn't. Farouk El-Baz of NASA says, quote, "If water vapor is coming from the moon's interior is this serious, it means that there is a drastic distinction between the different phases of the lunar interior, that the interior is quite different from what we have seen on the surface." Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, both who were high-respected Russian scientists who in 1970 asked this very simple question, quote, "Is the moon a creation of alien intelligence?" Dr. Harold Urey, who won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, once said, quote, "I am terribly puzzled by the rocks from the moon, and in particular, their titanium content." And for those of you who don't know, it is said that if the moon does contain a hollow, metallic inner structure, that it would likely be made of titanium, hence the strange high amounts of titanium that have been found in moon rocks. The famous cosmologist Carl Sagan once put it very simply and bluntly when he said, quote, "A natural satellite cannot be a hollow object." Erwin Shapiro of Harvard and the Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics says, quote, "The best possible explanation for the moon is observable error. The moon doesn't exist. Our moon is bigger than it should be, apparently older than it should be, and much lighter in mass than it should be. It occupies an unlikely orbit and is so extraordinary that all existing explanations for its presence are fraught with difficulties, and none of them could be considered remotely watertight." So these are just a handful of the quotes coming from some of the most respected men on the planet, the smartest men, guys who know what they're talking about, people that have won Nobel Prizes. And everything that we have just read to you, it all follows one common pattern, in that the very existence of the moon, let alone its composition, is very hard to explain. So just to go over some of the things we've learned about our moon here. Above all, and to put it simply, the moon seems to be engineered. The lunar module experiments were the perfect example of that, when they set up the seismometers on the moon, which then picked up the moon ringing like a bell afterwards, gave us distinct data that something wasn't right under the surface. Another thing to note about our moon is that it has elements on its surface that it should not have. One of the most fundamental questions that have plagued scientists for years was how it was possible that the surface of the moon was so hard, and why does it contain minerals like titanium? Mysteriously, there have been lunar rocks, meaning rocks that were taken from the moon that have been found to contain processed metals, such as brass, mica, and the elements of uranium-236 and neptunium-237 that have never been found to occur naturally. Yet, there are traces of them on the moon. Uranium-236 is a radioactive nuclear waste, which is found in spent nuclear and reprocessed uranium. Neptunium-237 is a radioactive metallic element and a byproduct of nuclear reactors and the production of plutonium. So what are these elements doing on the moon? Elements that do not occur naturally and specifically come as products and byproducts of nuclear reactors and the production of radioactive materials. Another thing we've learned is that Earth's moon does not have a solid core, like every other planetary object. The moon is also older than Earth, and is unlike any other satellite that we've ever discovered in the known universe. Researchers know that the moon is 4.6 billion years old, and that raises many questions. This means that the moon is older than the Earth by nearly 800,000 years. It also has an incredible orbit, and is the only moon in the solar system that has a stationary, nearly perfect circular orbit, and it does not spin like a natural celestial body, nor does it have any characteristics with any other moons found in our solar system. Now, going back to these lunar rocks that contain titanium, not only have they found titanium in the rocks, but these moon rocks contain 10 times more titanium than the quote, titanium-rich rocks found on planet Earth. And astronauts are terribly puzzled by this fact. They cannot account for the presence of this titanium. But many researchers have accounted for it and have simply said there's a perfect explanation. The moon has a hollow inner titanium core. And as the moon has been struck by millions, if not billions of meteorites over the years, it has chipped away at this titanium inner core, which would perfectly account for the high levels found in the lunar rocks. Last but not least is the moon's precise position in regards to our planet. We have a moon that is in a nearly perfect position. It's at a precise altitude, course, and speed, allowing it to function properly with regards to our planet. And again, this goes back to the fact that the moon, where it is currently, should not be there. And everything we've seen points to the possibility that the Earth's moon is not only artificial, but that it was in fact placed into its current orbit around our Earth. So I want you guys, if need be, watch this video again. Listen to all of these quotes and all of these facts. These are all facts. And I want you to seriously ask yourselves, does this make sense? Let me know down in the comments. Very exciting news with this private company possibly heading to the moon very soon to dig down deep under the surface. Of course, I will continue to follow this story and post future videos on it. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe on your way out. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys all back here in just a bit.